Good afternoon and welcome to our regularly scheduled meeting of the Glendale Water and Power Commission. Today is Monday, December 6, 2010. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Jamian?
Present.
Commissioner Armenian?
Present.
Commissioner Chan?
Present.
Commissioner Miller?
Present.
President Yao?
Present. Next item, please.
Item 2A, approval of the October 4th, 2010 meeting minutes.
And just to remind the Commission that this was postponed into today's meeting because we have some comments, and I think I made some comments, and so did Commissioner Miller. Has those comments been accepted? Any other additional comments or edits? Okay.
I'll make a motion that the minutes be approved as accepted. Yes, as amended, I should say.
And that's 2A. Is there a second?
I second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Do we go to each minutes, Christine?
Mr. President, you could do it all together, which would be a little bit quicker, or you could take them one by one, whatever.
Let's take it one by one since Commissioner Miller wasn't here for last meeting, and so we have those minutes as well, and also the special meeting minutes. Was that one? Okay, then if there's no edits or comments for the other minutes, is there a motion to approve 2B?
I'll make a motion that the minutes for the special meeting on October 11th be approved.
Second.
A motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approve 2B. And is there a motion for 2C to approve the meeting minutes for November 1st?
I'll move that the November 1st meeting minutes be approved.
A second.
Okay, we have a second. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So all the minutes are approved. Next item, please.
Reports information, item 3A, water report, Peter Kavunas.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Peter Kavunas, Assistant General Manager for Water Services. The reports have been provided to you. I'll be happy to answer any questions since there's nothing in particular to bring to your attention with this report.
Could you, Mr. Kavunas, go over some of the high-level conservation efforts in your report here?
Yes, the highest level I can approach this at, Mr. Chairman, is to bring your attention to the first page, Table 1. If you look at column F, that represents the water produced for fiscal year 2008-2009, you will notice that with just about one exception, every month the water production for that year was lower than the year prior, 2007-2008. If you look at column G, which is 2009-10, you will also notice that without exception but 1 month, the water production for the year 2009-2010 was lower than the year before that. And then if you look at the last column, which is this year, we are yet again, for each month, we are lower than each month the year prior. So for the third consecutive year in a row, we are seeing lower and lower and lower production. So the total amount consumed by Glendale has dropped from 33,700 acre-feet to 31.5 to 28.4. And this year we're trending lower than that. So remarkable conservation in the city.
Questions and comments?
I interpret this as a sign of extraordinary conservation effort on the part of the ratepayers, and I sense you concur with that. And in that case, I think we should all express gratitude to the public for their effort to conserve water during this time.
I do request that you put up the last chart, water conservation, so all of our ratepayers can see the chart. That shows very clearly that conservation efforts have been successful. The last chart. Yes, that one. For October to October, the bar in the blue, 2076 versus base year 2862. And just for that month, we saved 27%, and overall year-to-date is 18%. So that's phenomenal. Congratulations.
Right. And our target is that line that is shown up there. So we would have been happy if we just hit that line,
right.
And we far exceeded that.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
And that means also we've complied with our conservation requirement from the Metropolitan Water District.
Of course. And
That should be highlighted. Thank you.
we're far from the risk of any penalties this fiscal year. I would like to point out that given the rainier than expected fall and above expected storage in the system, Metropolitan Water District is considering that come July 1, they would lift the requirement for conservation. And I'll bring you more updates on that as time goes on.
I just wanted to comment for the benefit of the public that given that we just had some rain yesterday, that remind people to turn off their sprinklers when it rains so that you're not unnecessarily using up water that way.
You're prepared, I think, to talk about your performance measures report. Is this an appropriate time to discuss that?
We can. I was not going to comment on that, Commissioner Miller, because this is still in draft form. It's under construction, as I mentioned last month. It's been slightly improved from the month before, but at this point, I'm not vouching for the numbers, the definitions, or anything that's in it. But I do want to bring to your attention that we're continuing to improve that. And my hope is that in probably 2 months' time, we'll have it in a place where it'll stay static and be updated on a month-to-month basis.
I see that it is a draft and that it isn't complete and that it was discussed during the last meeting. I just wanted to offer my gratitude towards you for providing a report that is so comprehensive, I think. And I believe that I don't know whether you intend to report monthly on it, but having a report like this, I think, will be an excellent way of gauging the health of the water system in Glendale. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Commissioner.
I don't know if it's appropriate, but I was wondering if we could use this opportunity to maybe you could at least mention where we are with the water rate redesign process.
That will be part of our financial report. There will be a full report on that.
Okay, thank you.
If there's anything else, then thank you, Mr. Kulis.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item, please.
Item 3B, Smart Grid Update and Annual Report. Craig Keenan.
Mr. President, Commissioners, Craig Keenan, Business Transformation and Marketing Administrator. I'm here to give you the Smart Grid update. And I'm going to start out by just talking about some key dates in the project history, since we are at a milestone right now where we're starting our production of our meters. And so, I'm doing this. You're not. Okay. Basically, the project really got started, it was July 2007, so we've been at this a while now. That's when we went to City Council to present our response to, I believe it was PURPA at the time, and in there required us to take a look at smart meters. And when we went that night to Council suggested that we go back and take a long look at smart meters, develop a long-term plan for transitioning to there, and they thought that we should take a leading role in that. So that's the one date on this slide I just wanted to point out. August 6, 2009, we applied for a $20 million Smart Grid grant. That October, we found out we received the grant, and then our plans really accelerated. What started out to be just a smart meter project then became Smart Grid project, and it's considerably larger, more transformative project for the utility. As far as our project, Phase 1 is the AMI and the MDMS project. Where are we at right now? We are in the execute mode. You can see that's a picture of the electric meters we're putting out there. So that means we're basically going to production now. We've given a notice to proceed to our installer, and we're ramping up installations beginning actually this week. And as far as water meters, Phase 1 includes the smart water meters. You can see that's a picture of our new Badger meter with the endpoint on it that transmits the data back to our MDMS. Also part of the project is the water leak detection system. We're putting these about every 5 or 6 meters on the system so we can listen to the system to detect water leaks. We've already You're moving along real quick. We've already found about 4 or 5 leaks and corrected it. I know we're in a hurry tonight. We can go to the next slide. We've installed our communications backhaul. This is our Tropos Wi-Fi system. It includes our collectors and our what we call the CCUs for the water system. And you can see that's what the Tropos radio looks like. I believe the antenna next to the Tropos radio is for the water CCU. It's a little taller of a stick that sticks up from there. And basically, we're pretty much done there. We had one more installation to do at Flint Peak, and that should be done in the next week or so. Our MDM is in place, and it's been tested. We're not billing off of it yet, but we've done and ran.
Craig?
What?
For the audience, could you detail what an MDM and the CCU is?
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I've been using these terms for so long. CCU is short for the collection unit that collects the data from the various water meters that are out there in the field. I don't know exactly what CCU stands for, but it is the collection unit for the water. MDM is Meter Data Management System. That's the servers and the software that the data comes into your system. It houses the data and it manages the data for you. The data goes from the MDM to this customer information system, so we can develop bills. We can look at histories. That data will also go to other systems in the utility when they're installed. I'll talk a little bit about those systems coming up. In the meter data management system, we have installed it. You can see on the far left, that's the home area network. Those are your in-home displays that we're going to look at giving people, management of smart appliances, things like that. That connects up with the electric meters, and on the bottom there, the second column from the left is the water meters. The data goes from the electric and water meters. Electric goes to the open-way system. The water goes to the save source system. Both of those go into our meter data management, and then that information, like I just said, goes out to the other systems to do the billing and other things like outage management when we have that system in place. As far as phase 1, the Gantt chart, we have completed the backhaul. We're starting the production of the meters this month. We're in the process of completing our IT upgrades, looking at what the system needs, doing our architecture plan, meter complete install, all the meters. We're hoping to get there July 2011. Then we go to system testing September next year.
Just to elaborate, your proof of concept did involve installation at certain locations, correct?
Yes, we installed about 1,500 electric, about 500 water in the initial proof of concept that was, I believe, May, June timeframe. And then just about a month or so ago, we went out and installed another 200 electric meters and some more water meters just to further test our processes.
And your sample was based on proportions of industrial and homeowner-type customers, I take it, or multi-residential?
What we looked at was we wanted to do some meters around the city, around the Civic Center here.
Yes.
So we get a mix of customers, and then up towards the northern part of the city, get different elevations. And then
Okay.
Phase 2 is the customer programs. In-home displays, we're still in the design planning station, our planning part of this. We're looking at a number of vendors, and we're evaluating. We're not at the point to pick any and install them yet. We might test out a few in a pilot just to see how they work. But that technology is changing a lot, and we have to make sure we're picking the right one before we move forward. We do continue to do the O-Power reports. We're working with Itron and O-Power to change the current program to accept smart meter data. Once we do that, we'll be able to provide a web portal and paper reports to about up to 50,000 additional customers. Right now, we provide about 25,000, so be the rest of our residential base. Yes.
I take it your Phase 1 and Phase 2 are occurring in parallel?
Yes.
Okay, so they're not sequential as
No,
phases
no.
usually are. This is two different components of a project that are being done in
Yes,
parallel then. Okay, thank you.
Thermal energy storage, we have installed 28 ice bears around on city facilities and tested those out. We're about to go out into the community and install some there. This program, I believe we were finalists for a national award. We just got notice of it, and there'll be a press release on that. We didn't win the award, but we were one of 3 finalists. So, demand response, that program, we are in the execute stage right now. It has pretty much been designed, and we're recruiting customers. We won't really be doing that till next summer, though. We just have to get customers signed up. Electric vehicles, we're just starting to look at that. I know Ramon was, Mr. Abwag was here a month or 2 ago and gave you a presentation on electric vehicles, and we're looking to do a study on that to see which way we should go as far as whether it makes sense to own the charging stations or provide some incentives to people. We just need to take a look at that. So, dynamic pricing, time of use pricing, that's a ways down the road. We have to get the meters in and collect about a year's worth of data, have a chance to look at how people are using the data, and then we'll look at designing rate programs. Let's see, this is the Gantt chart for the customer programs. So with the home area network, we're going to look at testing some systems by May of next year, implement some pilots to test the...
Mr. Cunin, just to go back a step in the dynamic pricing programs, just to explain that a little bit further for the public, that's where I assume you will be incentivizing people to use electricity at different times of days in order to balance the demand on the system.
Exactly. So for time of use, the price would be, typically would be higher in the afternoon than in the evening to encourage people to switch their usage of electricity, that they can switch to evening hours. Dynamic pricing or peak pricing could be, should we decide to do those kind of programs, would price it based on what the cost was at that time of the day. So, and it's a little more...
But these are all still, in theory, things
Yes.
that need to be worked out, just so no one gets concerned that...
And they would be voluntary. We're not looking to
Yeah.
force people into these
Right.
kinds of
It would be a
rates.
choice that they would
Yes.
have.
A question on your slide there. You have design before plan. I presume that was a mistake. Normally you plan before you design. Or was that, is there something else going on there that... I see some smiles. I guess it was a mistake.
Depends on how you look at it.
Yeah, I mean, designing is more, do your research and see what's out there, and then you would have an actual plan that you would build to.
All right.
So I talked about the O-Power reports. We're looking April, May to start that program. The ICE energy, thermal energy storage program I mentioned was already underway. Electric vehicles, we're going to do a little more research in the next couple months to come up with a plan for that, and experimental pricing is a ways down the road. Distribution automation, there's 2 parts to this, and as with the other ones, all these say are phases, but they're kind of going on at the same time. We have the enterprise computer systems. That's the outage management system to help us manage outages and inform people what's going on. Distribution management system, that would be for Ramon's electric operations. A geographical information system. And then, let's see, AMS, asset management system. There are a lot of acronyms up there, but there's a number of different systems we're going to be looking at. They'll be connected to an enterprise service bus so they can share the data and then we can share it between systems and between parts of the organization through that bus. We do have a consultant on board that's developing that architecture plan right now. We hope to have that done in the next month or two. Feeder automation and substation automation, and that's the other half of the distribution automation piece. We're basically, we have a design for a pilot, and we're going to be putting the actual plan together and implementing it in the next few months. We'll start that. And I think I already covered most of these dates, but finalized system architecture for the enterprise computer system, February 2011. And then we got to look at what the architecture is and see what money we have and what systems make sense to go first to develop the plan, and then initiate the plan in around April. The hardware, we're February next year, we should have that at least for the pilot portion, which is 4 feeders that we're looking at automating. And implement it next year, and then hopefully go to full-scale deployment throughout the system a couple of years from now. So in terms of objectives of the overall program, it's, cost containment for the utility and the customers. That's our number one objective. Water sustainability. Let's see. Support for new innovations. Once the smart grid is out there, there's going to be things come along we haven't even thought of yet. Electric cars we're just starting to look at, but there'll be new products and new things, services, and new demands from our customers we'll have to be able to support. Environmental considerations, that's part of the reducing greenhouse gases, saving fuel. Be able to provide more enhanced customer service, having more information readily available when the customer calls so we can answer their questions and you can get instant information from their meter and really help them more. Improve reliability. Now the budget. The total project on the electric side is $51,302,000 through, I believe that's November. 18.4 million, or might be October. So 18.4 million is where.
As of October 31st, as I recall.
And I know I had the question last time about how much we billed DOE and what we received. We billed through August 6.8 million, and we received 5.6. We'll be caught up with our billing here in the next month. They allow us to send an invoice every 2 weeks, so we sent one today for August. We'll send in 2 weeks for September, and then we'll be able to send October 2 weeks after that. So water is the next one.
Can I interrupt?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
We're getting $20 million from DOE?
Yes.
Okay. And we have paid $8 million, you mentioned? Or more than that?
We've spent, how much have we spent? 18.4 so far.
Okay, I see. And you mentioned that there's another 5.6 million?
We've billed DOE for 6.8 million, and we've received, and of that we received 5.6.
Oh, I see. Okay, I'm going to let you go on. I'm sure you're going to go into the source of the money for the future, or the next 3 years.
The next slide was for water. It was the project is 16.9 million, and we've spent 7.7. And the last chart is just it's the other Gantt chart. So
Before you go there, I think where Commissioner Chan was going. So if we're going to get a total of 20 million, and you're saying the project cost is 51 million.
Yes.
So where's the difference between those two figures? Where are those funds coming from?
Much of those funds are already in our reserves. So we've already We bonded a couple of years ago, and we've put money aside for this project. So much of it, not all of it, but much of it is already accounted for.
And already budgeted?
Yes. Oh, it's all already
Okay.
budgeted, yes.
Great, thank you.
Already covered.
And that applies to the water side, too. The reason it's important to separate out the two, because the 20 million DOE funds only apply to the electric side, not to the water side.
But the total cost of the project is $51 million on both sides?
No,
No,
it's approximately 70 million.
$70 million.
Yes.
So $51 million is the electricity side.
That's correct.
Out of approximately $70 million, $20 million is basically federal taxpayer dollars coming back to Glendale, and then the balance of $50 million is through our own sources.
That's correct.
I believe that last slide was just the Gantt chart all put back together.
Yeah, could we go back to the project budget and expenses for either of the systems there? Yeah, there you go. Now, you'll notice there's a large discrepancy between the budgeted amount versus the spent amount. Is that due to underspending or underreporting? Do you project that discrepancy will carry through to the end of the project? And if so, you don't. All right.
Commissioner Miller, no, the primary reason for that is we had expected to go to production for the electric and water meters back in July, and that took us a little bit longer to get there, so we're 3 or 4 months behind in getting the meters installed.
Will that affect your project schedule? Do you expect the project to have a longer schedule than was originally planned? And do these charts indicate the actual expected schedule at this point?
That is our expected schedule. The black line is the expected expenditures over time.
Okay.
What we expect to happen is in the next 6 months, we will accelerate our meter installations. Those lines will then start to merge. At this time, we're not saying that production schedule is going to stretch on past July, but it might. But we're going to still keep our June-July timeframe for that.
Your budget also for the water system ends in June 2011 approximately, whereas for the electrical system it's February of 2013. I take it that electrical system has far more meters, and that's why it needs a longer time.
Actually, that's a function of the grant. The grant requires us to spend the $51 million over a 3-year period ending March 3rd, 2013. That project includes all the customer things that will take a little longer to do, and the distribution automation piece, particularly the enterprise computer systems, and so that's going to take that's going to go on for a couple more years. Where the water, it's putting in the water meter, and once it hooks up with our computer systems, that's pretty much done. There's not a lot of additional things after that.
You're using some sophisticated hardware here that I think the utility hasn't had much experience with, and I'm wondering about your operation and maintenance. I imagine it's probably going to be more complicated than what you've experienced, and have you given much thought about that? I know in a previous meeting we asked for a Gantt chart related to operation and maintenance, and all of your Gantt charts here are really related to capital construction and implementation. You plan on presenting us later with a Gantt chart for O&M? And can you comment on the O&M?
Did you want to talk about our meeting today? Or?
Yeah, actually, we literally just came out of a meeting to start to plan the implementation for the transition to the operation of the new system. So
Okay.
the question is quite
Timely.
Yeah, timely.
But it's going to take some time to work that out, I
It
take
will.
it.
It
Okay,
will.
so maybe in a future meeting we can hear more about it.
Yes, in fact, I would say probably in the next 3 to 4 months, at some point in one of those meetings, we'll have much more to talk about. But we are just beginning the transition of our workforce from a strictly operational, a hardware-based operational system, as we are today, as most utilities are, to a more IT-driven operational system. And that's,
Right.
that's the biggest single change. And that will take some time. It will take quite a bit of effort on our part. It will take retraining, so there's much to be done.
Adaptation. There's going to have to be some
Yep.
adaptation. I have more questions, but they're on specific parts. I'd like to allow others to talk
Yeah, sure.
about more
Any other
general things,
comments
budget
from-
related.
I was just going to suggest, so if I'm correct, we're at the point now where we're going to start more general deployment throughout our territory. I think maybe I was just going to make a suggestion, perhaps at the next month's meeting, it would be good to walk through for customers, what are they going to experience when there's a meters change out happening? What are the kind of the steps that they will initially feel, everything from, what kind of truck's going to show up, who the vendor's going to be, they're going to change out the meter, here's what the meter's going to do initially, and then later on, here's where the meter's functionality will take us to at a future point. Just a more simplified explanation for the average customer so that they know what they're, when a truck shows up in front of their door, trying to swap out a meter that, the power's going to go out for about 10 minutes while they're swapping out, the meters, that sort of thing. Just to prepare customers in case they have any concerns in advance.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I like to second that too, because I think that's very important, is to help the customer understand the process of getting a new meter. Because, we hear that early utilities will spend 10 minutes to install one. It's a no-brainer, but what is that process? Do you expect someone to knock on the door, or someone just to install a meter, then put a door hanger and walk away, So it'll be helpful to understand that process for the customer.
And I think one thing especially will be important in that is that if there are customers who are operating any sort of medical equipment for whom, even a 10-minute outage might be significant, or home-based businesses that are operating a server at home, what sort of steps for those sorts of kind of special situations so that we give as much notice in advance. But anyway, the general process is what I'm talking about.
I'd like to continue that discussion on the customer experience, because one of your slides, Mr. Keenan, is that you mentioned enhanced customer service. If you maybe piggyback on that presentation that you're going to do for the customer notification and experience on installing a new meter, that if you can mention what is enhanced customer service, what is the customer expecting that's different than what they're getting with a regular meter? Would they be able to do anything differently? And if so, how? And other things that I've heard in the past from other utilities experience with customer service, that when a new meter gets installed, pretty much people see higher bills, or they have history where they can't see anymore. So isn't there a way we can ensure that those, whatever the existing program or information that a customer has with an existing meter will still be available to them? Because I know even swapping out an old meter, your history or usage or background information pretty much starts over. So if people want to know how they're saving, if they're saving with a new meter, they have to compare that with historical usage. And so we have to ensure that that information is available and can be readily obtained by our customer if we install the new meters. So if we can maybe ensure that that's going to take place, that would be great, because that's very important to our customers to have that background information or historical usage.
And you also mentioned the fact that when the new meter is put in, you don't want to make any major changes and shifts in rates and that kind of thing. And that was very important to us, and that's why Craig mentioned early on that although we are looking at time of use, dynamic pricing, peak pricing, we're not going to do any kind of change at all, at least for a year or more. History until customers understand how these systems work.
And also what I hear from other utility experiences, that customer might see a higher bill, because the meters are now more accurate, and they might be getting a discount all this time. So is there a way we can educate the customer more that they might benefit from better meters, but they might also experience a higher usage because of certain conditions? So the more we educate the customer, the better. Any comments?
Yeah, I have some more questions. By the way, I would like to suggest these PowerPoint presentations are excellent, but it might be helpful in terms of discussion if they got numbered so that we can refer to them by number, and then you can easily hit them up for future. You have a Smart Grid project phase 1 showing your MDM management or meter design management.
Meter data management.
Meter data management, yes, thank you. Hardware there is now your system, of course, is going to be monitoring usages real time, correct? I mean, that's part of its power.
Well, The data will come back to the utility every 2 to 4 hours for electric
Okay.
and maybe 4 to 6 hours for water.
Almost real
The
time.
near real time is for the customer.
Yeah.
If they have an in-home display, it will talk directly to the meter. It'll be a few seconds off, but that's where you get the real time.
Okay, and then you're going to have memory extending for some time, right? The records will be kept.
Oh, yes.
The records will be kept for how long, would you estimate?
Well, actually, the slide with the nice picture, that is our storage.
Yeah.
That's our
Oh,
that's our
okay.
sand storage. And, I'm not an IT person, but there's enough storage in the system we have to cover 7 to 10 years worth of
Okay,
data.
very good. And do you have is there going to be backup
Yes.
equipment? There's a backup procedure? If there's some kind of failure of
We have a
power
whole
or something?
disaster recovery.
Okay.
There's a mirrored system we'll have a mirrored system in Burbank in their IT.
Did we
So-
test it? Pardon me, continue.
So the sand that we have here on the third floor of Perkins, we'll have one in Burbank. So our storage will be in both places, and it'll be synced up, near pretty much real-time synced up. So we do have a disaster recovery plan in that sense.
Did we test those disaster recovery systems during the pilot?
The system in Burbank is not installed yet.
Okay, all right, so we haven't had a chance to test
But
it.
the system here is, and it took quite a bit of work, not only technically, but physically, to make sure that we could physically accommodate the SAN. The SAN stands for Storage Area Network, by the way, and so that is a critical piece of this system. It's good that you pointed that out.
Thank you. On another subject, on our proof of concept, can you elaborate a little bit on the outcomes of that? What problems did we face, if anything, or can you comment? Just kind of curious.
Well, in the proof of concept, we like I said, we did 1,500 meters, 500 water meters. We ran like 15 different tests on the system to make sure the data was coming back the way it should. We did run into some issues with meters, knowing what meter was at what location, but we basically worked out all those problems. We're talking about meter types.
Okay.
And so we've cleaned up the meter database. We actually went out and took pictures of every non-residential meter so we could verify what was there. So we knew when we would go out there in production, we would be putting the right meter at the right location. And there was a number of different procedural things that we had to work out. If Terry McDonald was here, we have a spreadsheet of a
Okay.
couple hundred items that we went through meticulously to make sure they were all corrected before we went to production in
Good
each one of
job.
them.
Good job. Thank you. I had a question on your thermal energy storage.
Yes.
That's a little bit of a arcane subject, I would think, for the public. Could you elaborate what thermal energy storage is about, the purpose of it, the benefits, and so forth?
Well, for our program, what it does is it makes ice at night, and then you use that ice during the day to cool your air. So you're operating your air conditioning unit in the middle of the night where it's more efficient because the air is cooler. There's a box that's filled up with water that with coils in it, and when you run your air conditioning, instead of cooling the air, it makes ice. And then during the day, it runs the fluid through that ice and it makes cold air.
We'll have some opportunities to educate customers regarding this technology.
Yes, we
Yeah,
could
okay.
do. In fact, there's one right outside here, right in the parking lot. As you go out the door here, you can see one of these units is right there.
Also one on the, you can see from Glendale Avenue, right? Right outside the GWP building?
Yes, there's a couple right there up by the Perkins
The
building.
concept is basically shifting usage from an off-peak time to peak time. In other words, being able to use off-peak energy to
Yes.
power when we need power in a peak time.
Yes.
And regarding the electric vehicle program, what's the scope of work associated with that in the context of the smart grid meter program or project? Is it merely to identify locations and times when recharge would be most effective? We're not getting
Well,
actual
there's a
vehicles.
number of things we want to look at, including, what would be the best business model for us going forward? Would we want to own public charging stations, install them and own them, maintain them, and then
So
sell the electricity?
We're kind of exploring the marketability.
Yes.
That's really the scope. Okay. And is that part of the federally funded project? Or is that
I've
something-
added it to our project implementation
From the
plan.
beginning.
And they've okayed it.
Okay, all right, okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
I just have one last supplement to the request that Commissioner Me and I made about the customer notification process.
Mhm.
Can you also include the meter dispute process, if any, that we might have in place? Like if a customer gets a new smart meter, and if the customer dispute that because their bill is higher, how does GWP plan to resolve that dispute? Would they test the old meter and
Sure.
and check with the new meter? Those type of process.
We will go over that. We'll review that.
Great. Very useful. Any other comments or
I
questions?
do have one more question. In your presentation, you mentioned that you guys were installing the leak detection system every 4 to 5 houses. Is that correct?
It's on the distribution. Yeah. Is it 4 or 5?
Yes, it is. It's about every 5 meters or so.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make it clear. So it will be able to detect if there is a leak at every single residence, or will
It will detect leaks in the home and also in the street.
Great. If there's no additional comments or questions for Mr. Keenan, thank you, Mr. Keenan.
Thank you for the presentation. Very informative.
For next time, do you want the presentation limited to these items? Because it will take is this...
My thought was if we could, since you're about to start with deployment, maybe we can just, if you need to chop it up, but at least focus on the part on what our customer's going to experience
Sure.
in the change process. And then we can move on to other issues like once meters are being deployed, if there's, for example, the increased bills, if people want to inquire about that, or any sort of dispute resolution process as well.
Let's also include the Gantt charts, if we could,
Okay.
updates of those, and an update of your project budget expenses.
How many
Yeah.
meters we've installed and things
Yes,
like
that sort of thing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Next item, please, George.
Item 3C, peak power pricing, Steve Lenz.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, Steve Lenz, Assistant General Manager of Supply for Glendale Water and Power. How are you this evening? I've got 2 reports for you tonight. The first one is regarding peak power pricing. And at the October 4th Commission meeting, Mr. Steiger reported that in September, Glendale Water and Power had reached an all-time high in energy usage, and that we'd come back with a little bit of price information for you regarding the energy that we had to use to supply that month, and also talk a little bit about reducing peak usage, which dovetails a little bit into what Craig just gave you. So it was September 27th, 2010. Our all-time peak was 343 megawatts. Prior peak was 336. And I'm just going to throw out a lot of price numbers here to give you an understanding of kind of the extremes of where the market was on that day. At that time, at the peak, the hour-ahead ISO price, or California Independent System Operator price, was $87.70 per megawatt hour, or 8.7 cents per kilowatt hour. The real-time price at that time went as high as $160 a megawatt hour, right at the peak. And that's basically 16 cents per kilowatt hour. On the same day, the low hour-ahead off-peak price at 4 a.m. was $17.58 a megawatt hour, or rounded up, about 2 cents. And this will get into that dynamic, peak shifting that Commissioner Armenian talked about earlier. And just for point of reference, our current fuel adjustment charge is about 4.8 cents per kilowatt hour. And that's what we estimate over the year we'll need to charge to supply our customers for the entire year with energy. I've handed out 2 charts. The first chart shows peak price curves, and it's a little bit messy, but the point is really simple, and I'm trying to get across some of the numbers that I just mentioned. You'll see on this peak chart, the very top peak price there is approaching $80 or $90, and that's a reflection of the $87 peak price that I mentioned. You'll see that the low is less than 30 cents per megawatt hour on peak, or close to 3 cents per kilowatt hour. The second chart deals with off-peak for September 2010. The real-time off-peak ranges from $15 to $33, or 1.5 cents to 3.3 cents. In terms of average generation cost for the month of September, and these numbers aren't dramatic, and I'll tell you why when I get through them, but the average generation cost at Grayson Power Plant was about $44.50, or 4.5 cents a kilowatt hour. The peak, on the day of the peak, the average was $46, or 4.6 cents. So we're talking about 4.45 to 4.6. It doesn't seem dramatic, but it's important to understand that we really have a significantly depressed energy market right now. Gas prices are very low. Peak and off-peak energy prices are very low, and that these differences can really be multiplied when the market moves up. The concept, as Craig described, behind Smart Grid is that we want to use demand-side management, time-of-use rates, and storage to either reduce those peaks or shift the peak to a time where the rate is much cheaper. And Craig mentioned the dynamic peak pricing. If you just look at the extremes of the numbers that I've given you, if you can shift energy use from a time where you were paying 16 cents per kilowatt hour to the off-peak where it was 2 cents per kilowatt hour, and we're talking that in that off-peak, someone's only paying 12.5% of that peak price. And at this point, as Commissioner Armenian mentioned, it is just a concept, but if you start to offer people time-of-use rates where they can shift their usage of their, they're doing their laundry or their dishes or their pool pump to 4 a.m. when the price is 2 cents instead of 16 cents, you can see some real incentive for folks to move their usage into those times.
Mr. Lenz, if I could just stop you for a second, just for the sake of simplifying it for the public. Right now, the way the customer sees the benefit or the impact of these issues is through general rates, having to do with coming up with the budget to run GWP and provide the power that is required. But in the future, if we get into dynamic pricing programs that customers can participate in, and if they choose to participate, then they can benefit more directly and immediately and see it reflected on their bills, potentially, depending on how we design it.
That's correct, and this ties in with what Mr. Keenan was saying about the overall objective of Smart Grid is to make it more efficient and, at the end of the day, to reduce costs for the ratepayers.
And to provide some greater context, you mentioned, so on this peak day, which I think you said September 27th, 343 megawatts of power. For general context, what is our capacity to, how much can we produce through our own generation versus what we buy on the power market? We
have about 450 megawatts of resources. Many of them are very old and very inefficient and therefore not economic. So when you get into these peak times, if you turn on some of your less efficient units, the cost is a little bit higher, or you can go to market if the market's competitive as well.
For example, on this peak day where we needed 343 megawatts, how much of that were we producing through our own plants, and how much of that did we approximately get on the market? Do you have that data available?
Let me see if I have that detail. We have about 30% was market purchases and 70% was produced by our own resources.
So in theory, we have the ability to meet that demand, but when you look at the cost of firing that up, potentially it is, or in this case, it's actually less expensive to buy a percentage of it on the market versus firing up everything that you've got to full capacity.
It is, and you'll see a little bit in the next item when I get into discussing some of the units. We've got some units that were built in the 50s that have a heat rate of 12,000 to 14,000, where the marginal unit on the market is at a 7,000 heat rate, twice as efficient. as the units that we're producing with. So the final point on the peak pricing is, last week a group of us went to Duke Energy to see their smart grid demonstration project. And in addition to reducing peak energy, we want to use energy blocks. They can be orchestrated to increase reliability and decrease times of outages as well. So in addition to making the system more efficient, reducing costs, we also can increase reliability and reduce the time of an outage through that grid. But ultimately, if the system's efficient enough, you can even avoid adding new generation. And we're actually at a unique point in time now where we're looking at our integrated resource plan. We're thinking about potentially replacing 50 megawatts of peaking capacity at the plant. And as part of this effort and the integrated resource plan effort, we're going to be looking at, can we avoid putting that in, that $50 to $60 million unit in, or can we reduce the size of that resource that we need to put in? And as I mentioned, I'll get into that more in the integrated resource plan item. But that's all my comments on the peak pricing. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Yes, you had a few other slides, but
I have 3 other charts that are in there for the 20-year integrated resource plan.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, I guess if we're done, I will move on to that item, which is...
Item 3D, Integrated Resource Plan, Steve Lenz.
As part of GWP's 5-year strategic plan, we have 3 power supply initiatives that require development of a resource model. Those 3 items include modernizing the plant to bring its heat rate down below 10,000, responding to our renewable energy mandates from the state, and then finally trying to make sure that our resources are balanced across fuels, that we have some fuel diversity so that all our eggs basically aren't in one basket. On all 3 of those projects, the timeline to complete this resource model is now March 2011. This date has been extended a bit. I think we came to you a while back and introduced the topic to you. But due to budget impacts, we've had to slip our anticipated build date for a new unit, if we build one, from 2015 to 2017. So the resource model work's being handled in 2 phases. The first phase was an initial screening process, and we hired Pace Global to help us with that project. The second phase is a 20-year stochastic modeling process that we're working with RW Beck on. So in front of you, and now I'll move to the charts, in front of you is 3 charts from the PACE project. And their report was a 53-page report, but I pulled out 3 relevant charts just to give you an idea of the types of conclusions that they came to. The first chart shows our resource stack and how we meet our load with existing resources. And this is a classic least cost dispatch approach. First, you layer in your base resources that are locked in, that are take or pay, that you have to take. Those include nuclear, coal, geothermal, landfill gas, and then Magnolia Power Plant has a certain minimum that it must run. The remainder of our needs are met on a least cost dispatch using existing resources. So this chart, which is difficult to see on the screen, but it's probably easier for you to see in front of you, shows you how after we've layered in the Magnolia base that we then move to shaped wind, hydro, and Magnolia that's variable that we can move in to meet our needs. And then to the higher cost, and this goes to what I was talking about earlier, you'll see on the left side of that chart there's kind of a light blue section as the curve on the left side steepens. That's our more expensive Grayson Power Plant resources that we wait.
Because of the heat issue.
Right, because of the heat rate and the inefficiency. We wait to use those until the last minute or until there's a better alternative. If there's no better alternative, then we'll finally scale those in.
So this is basically how you would scale to meet as demand rises, right?
Correct. On the left is megawatts that we have to serve the city. So it goes from 0 to 300. And across the bottom is the percentage of the time that we have to meet that level. So you'll see kind of at the 100 megawatt level, we pretty much always have at least 100 megawatts of load to serve. And that's filled with all of our base resources. And then as you move up to 300, we're scaling in our more expensive resources to meet that need.
So Grayson doesn't kick in until when you really need it.
Correct.
If I could ask, since this chart is very small, even in printed form, I don't know if it's possible to have it on the website for customers, because I think it's important for them to start learning and seeing where these things come from, because this obviously factors all the way back into rates and costs for running our utility.
Sure, I'm sure we could post it, and it is a good representation of all of our resources, except for market.
Yep.
By the way, along with that, I think it would also be helpful to show how much we've been able to use each resource for some period of time, let's say a year or something like that. How much of the annual power consumption in Glendale has been due, let's say, to coal as opposed to wind, so people could get a sense of the application of the renewable energy portfolio in particular.
We actually have a power label posted now that has that information percentage, and it's calculated based on megawatt hours generated for the entire year.
Yep. Okay.
So it shows you the percentage of wind, coal, hydro. That's already on the power use label that's posted on the site.
Thank you, then.
The second chart is a scattergram of our options for a combined cycle at Grayson Power Plant. And once again, this is a lot of detail, but the intent of this is really to give you an idea of the order of magnitude of cost of some of these various options. On the horizontal axis is the portfolio cost, and you can see that goes from our existing portfolio cost, which is a little more than $91 per megawatt hour, up to, it shows the highest alternative costs are about $98 per megawatt hour. And once again, this is a scenario only using system resources that we own. We're not looking at it with market at this point. It's just looking at our resources. So generally, you're looking at this, we're trying to pick an option that minimizes portfolio cost. So those would be the dots that are moving towards the left. So all these dots over here, this black dot right there is the status quo. However, as I mentioned, we've got some units that are very old and are going to need replacement soon in one form or another. So looking at these options, you can see we're trying to get options over here towards the left that will minimize cost. Now, the green square on the very right, that's a big unit, a big 100 megawatt unit. And that's running it at 50%. And so while that raises the cost, the system cost, all the way up to $98 per megawatt hour, it has a lot of value in spinning reserve. And so you'll see that same unit is depicted up here. And it's harder to see, but it's kind of a light blue diamond. That's the same unit at 100% load. And the reason the system cost is lower is that you're now generating 100% of the time and selling it into the market. And so the system cost is reduced by your revenue.
There's a return on what you're
revenue from the market. So that's to give you an idea just of what the options are. And once again, for us, this makes a lot of assumptions regarding fuel costs and regarding market energy costs. And you know what they often say about models. It's, kind of garbage in, garbage out. And this was mostly based on one price curve for energy, one price curve for gas, which is why we're moving to the next step, which is a stochastic model where we can look at numerous scenarios with numerous price curves and get a better idea of what the range of possible outcomes is. So let me just move for a moment to the third chart. It's another scattergram. We're currently burning landfill gas in units 3, 4, and 5 at Grayson Power Plant. Like I mentioned before, they were built in 1957, and they're well beyond their expected useful life.
By the way, just to help our audience, LFG means landfill gas on your chart.
Yes, LFG is landfill gas. Correct. And the heat rate, as I mentioned earlier, once again, is very inefficient, 12 to 14,000, depending on the conditions. So the idea of this chart is to give us, once again, a general idea of options that make sense. And once again, the total portfolio cost is highest to the right, lowest to the left. You can see, once again, this black dot there is status quo, and it's down above $91 per megawatt hour. But as we mentioned, this assumes that this plant's going to hold up and not break down. We know that it's not going to last for another 20 years, and that at some point those maintenance costs are going to go up dramatically, and we're going to have to replace it with something. So generally, all the units out in the light blue cloud out there on the right are more expensive units that we're going to be more likely to rule out based on cost alone. But one thing is clear from this diagram, and once again, I'm trying to focus not on the detail, but the big picture here. One thing is clear. We're going to need a new unit, and getting one of the units over here that's more efficient than some of these more expensive options, it's going to cost us slightly more. I mean, if you look at some of these options, we're talking about going from $91.50 up to about $92.50. So it's not a huge increase based on this landfill gas option. But this landfill gas option is a snapshot of the landfill gas option without looking at the combined cycle option at the same time. So let me, I guess, summarize the PACE major conclusions from kind of these big picture diagrams. First is that a small local combined cycle unit that has some spinning reserve and some peaking flexibility that can burn landfill gas and natural gas is probably going to be your most cost-effective local option. Sizing of that unit is a different question. Second, retirement of those really old units that I mentioned, units 3, 4, and 5, are probably economical with appropriate replacements. And once again, we need to finish our stochastic model to determine exactly what the most optimal replacement is. Third, if you did go with their preferred big picture option, which is a 60 megawatt combined cycle replacement at Grayson, it would bring that heat rate down to below 9,000. Our goal is to get it down below 10,000. And then finally, a landfill gas upgrade option appears cost-effective, but it could be infeasible based on some of the technology. And so we need more work. You see on the scattergram a whole bunch of potential options for burning landfill gas, and not all of them have been completely tested. So part of the conclusion of the PACE study is, okay, we have a general idea of the types of units we might want to look at. There's two tracks that we'll want to proceed on with respect to the PACE study. One is do some more work on the landfill gas generation technology to confirm that they'll actually do what these companies are saying they'll do. GWP actually has very low BTU gas. It's around 330, and so some of these units may burn better gas but may not be able to burn our landfill gas. And then finally, we want to investigate an option that would clean up that landfill gas to basically pipeline-grade gas. And if we could do that, we could put it back into SoCalGas's pipe. Right now, that's not allowed under the tariff. And we've actually been talking to SoCalGas. SoCalGas has a pilot project to look at biogas because I think they see this coming, the renewable revolution basically coming, and they're starting to look at cleaning up biogas to put it in the pipe. And we're initiating a conversation with them to talk to them about cleaning up our landfill gas to put it in the pipe. If we could do that, that's kind of a game changer because we can then put it in the pipe, we can burn it over at Magnolia and Burbank at a 7,000 heat rate, and we don't have to base load it. So we're going to spend some time on both of those, and we'll soon be coming to you with proposals to look at both of those options. One is to confirm the technology on landfill. The second is to confirm whether or not we could clean up that landfill gas. So this leads into the R.W. Beck work. R.W. Beck's been hired to take these results from PACE and take it to the next level with the stochastic model. They call that model the Stochastic Econometric Risk Forecast, or SURF, modeling program. Their model is intended to model our entire system: transmission, generation, carbon costs, renewable energy requirements, and market costs. Put all of that in the system and help us identify 5 things. One is future generation and transmission requirements. The second is our greenhouse gas constraints and costs, and I know you're all aware that a lot of that's up in the air at the moment. We don't know if we're going to have a cap and trade. We don't know what carbon credits are going to cost. The third is our renewable portfolio standard goals and how much of which types of renewable energy we should scale in when. The fourth is operational constraints around the system, and then finally economics around all of that. So we've already used, Beck's already built the initial model. They've populated it with information from the PACE work and confirmed PACE's general conclusions. You know, that these are the types of units you would look at, and yes, you should investigate potentially cleaning up the gas. But what they're doing right now, and this is the final phase, is they're updating that model with current WEC, or Western Electric Coordinating Council, pricing and system profile data, so that we can rerun the model with multiple scenarios and try to get our heads around what the ranges of alternatives are. It's a 20-year model, and inputs for beyond, 3-ish years, start to get iffy. So we really want to put some stochastics around it and see what types of ranges we have, and from that, they're going to help us interpret the output and try to decide, what we do from here in terms of generation, how we scale in our renewables, et cetera, and basically how we meet our needs for the next 20 years. And that's the end of my comments. I'll be glad to take questions.
I have a question on the coal portion. It looks like at the current time we have about, 35, 40 megawatt. That's with a base load carried by coal. And I assume that includes IPP.
It includes IPP and San Juan.
Okay. And we're up for renewal for IPP. What year is it?
The term of the current IPP contract ends in 2027. There's a renewal that's still live. We're working actually with LIDWP to come up with an alternative for that site that would allow us to renew the contract, but with something that's not coal.
Right.
It might be natural gas, might be a combination of gas and solar. And right now there's a strategic planning effort underway at IPP that's looking at the next, basically through 2027, and trying to decide, what can we do with the generation resource there, because obviously we have an issue with carbon cost.
Right, exactly. So that's being looked at, and I guess depending on that outcome, that'll impact the amount we have for base load. Coal.
Correct.
Okay.
And we don't know what that looks like yet. We don't know if there'll be peaking gas units, baseload gas units, or maybe something else. I mean, technology is changing pretty quickly, and we've got a long time frame here of 20 years, and I think most of the people are in the project through 2027 because there's a lot of sunk costs in there, and I think we're going to do what we can to optimize, that resource. But I think everybody understands that in 2027 there's going to be something other than coal.
Okay, the next question I have is on solar. I don't see solar on this chart at all, which just means it's just a very small amount. Have we looked at large-scale solar?
We're looking at large-scale solar. We are investigating a large number of renewable projects through SCAPA, the Southern California Public Power Authority. So far, solar's just not in the money. There's one project that we may be bringing forward soon called La Paz, which is a unusual solar project, I'll say. It's kind of a huge ceramic chimney that heats up during the day, and then air runs through it like a toaster up the middle and generates across fans. But the traditional solar, it's just not in the money. I mean, it wasn't long ago that I think PG&E signed the largest solar agreement by anyone in the country, and it was around $220 a megawatt hour. That's 22 cents. And the renewables that we're getting now in terms of wind are more like 85 to 100, so 8.5 to 10 cents. So far, it's just not in the money. We've got some small projects around the city. The price is coming down fast, but it's still at this point not competitive.
And I understand that we're fully, I guess that the list is full in terms of getting the rebates, and we're on hold right now, but then the program will start up again next year?
Correct. We've exhausted the funds for this year, but it will start again next year.
January?
This is in terms of residential?
Residential, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
residential and commercial.
Is that January or July?
That's fiscal year.
Fiscal year, July 1st?
And just one more thing, when we are done with the BEC work, we will come back and give you a detailed presentation on kind of what we're thinking for our resources for the next 20 years, and you can give us your input.
I'm wondering, is in your scenario planning, I know it might be a little bit early for this, but is it a foregone conclusion that we would still have a Grayson plant, perhaps with a new unit, or could there be a scenario where we decide, we're going to shut down Grayson and acquire resources that we need from the market?
I think because of reliability reasons that we will have something at Grayson. There's been too many times in the past when we've had fires or earthquakes. In '94 we had the earthquake, we completely separated from LA, and we were up within hours. In LA I think took a couple days. I don't know the actual, but it was significantly different. And same thing with the recent fires we have with the station fires. LA called us. They needed 50 megawatts from us to keep the entire system in their control area running, and we did it. So I think there'll be something there. I think the real opportunity, which ties in with smart grid, is to try to see if we can do enough with smart grid and make it efficient enough that we can at least avoid building the bigger generator that we thought we were going to build. Try to scale it down and realize the savings from that more efficient system. I think that's the big opportunity, but I really do think there'll be something there in some form because of the reliability reasons.
As recent as last summer, fires occurred here. Had we not had Grayson available, we would have had to go to blackouts in order to maintain any kind of liability in various aspects of the city. So it's very, very important to us to maintain some kind of physical equipment within the boundaries of Glendale.
Our own generation?
Yes.
Commissioner Jemin and I took a tour of Grayson, thanks to Mr. Basson, who took the time out of his schedule. And it's clear that several of the units are very old. So the bottom line message here is that we're almost at a point where it's just not worth running some of those units because they're so inefficient. So we're getting close to having to decide what to do to replace that capacity within our system. And I would encourage you in future presentations, as we start to talk more about this, to spend some time to educate our customers about the important role of Grayson in whatever future form that might take.
Sure.
I think a lot of customers don't understand the benefits. Some might argue, why are we spending so much money? And obviously, whatever we replace will require a lot of capital replace it. And so to the extent we start educating the public about what role Grayson plays today and potentially in the future, I think would be an important thing to do as we get closer to some decision points on what to do with those assets.
Yeah, we say Grayson's the heart of the system. It really is.
I just wanted to concur with the point that was already made. I think it would be helpful to educate the customer base more on the importance of Grayson in terms of providing power with the reliability that it has, particularly because we're in an environment where power of that type is there's pressure occurring to prematurely abandon it. I had a couple of other questions, if I may. It wasn't really clear to me from your presentation whether the integrated resources plan is still under development or not. I take it that it is, but could you give us an estimate?
It is, and we kind of have two integrated resources plans. We have kind of a traditional 5-year, which we do every 5 years. The last one was '07, the next one's due 2012. We're calling this an integrated resource plan. It's really a 20-year look forward that's necessitated by all of these renewables and the modernizing that we have to do with the plant. So there's really two integrated resource plans, a 5-year, which we'll be coming back to you with in 2012, which is going to look very similar to the output of this 20-year model. The 20-year integrated resource plan is in process. RW Beck has developed our model, our stochastic model, and we anticipate that around March of 2011, we will have the output of that work. And the output of that work will be recommendations on what do we do to resource the system for the next 20 years, including, what renewables should we get, how should we scale them into the system, should we replace a unit at Grayson or not, and if so, what size, and then finally, what are we going to do with the landfill gas? Are we going to clean it up or put in a separate, smaller landfill gas-only unit to burn it in conjunction with a smaller peaker at the plant?
And so when would you expect the plans to be completed?
I expect to have Beck's final work around March 2011, and soon after that, we should be able to come back to you with a more detailed presentation.
Okay. I wanted to suggest that I think your presentation would have benefited more from us with a slide on your conclusions. The slides that you did have, I think, would have been confusing to a lot of our viewers. I think the people, our customers who are watching us are probably, quite well educated, but I don't think we can expect them to understand stochastic models. And so also that your conclusions, I didn't see how they were substantiated by by the evidence you were providing, and a little bit more work on that. I don't mean to be saying that they weren't substantiated, but it just wasn't clear to me, at least, and I assume not to a lot of the viewers. So also one other thing is that the graphs you have from PACE are quite good. The graphs you had earlier in your previous presentation lacked labels on the axes. It was unclear that it was cost per megawatt hour.
Okay.
So, and finally, I wanted to state that when we get the PowerPoint presentations drafted, I think you ought to test them to see if they come on the screen well enough. Your one graph here, which Commissioner Chan was alluding to, is
I know some of the information got
quite important, but it's very difficult for people to see. And she was talking about coal, and it would be nice to know what color that is and so forth. So, just a recommendation for future presentations so that the public can follow better, and ourselves as well. I don't know how you felt.
I would echo Commissioner Miller's statement in a more broader perspective. I think part of our mission, both from the GWP side and as a commission over the coming years as the utility business transforms, is we have to educate the public about the business to some degree. We can't just approach it from trust us, we know what we're talking about. We really need to bring them along in this journey of transformation that we're going through. And so I think to the extent that any of the presentations, even the most technical, can start to define some of these issues. So for example, Mr. Lindsay, we're referring to translating things to price per kilowatt hour, which is something that customers see on their bill, but they don't quite see it as a unit of measurement yet. I think over time we'll have to decide whether that's a unit of measurement that we want to educate customers around, just like they know the price of gasoline if you ask them today, because that's what they fill their tanks up with. All these things will start to factor into the gaining the support and understanding of the public on these, what are really important issues. The things that you're talking about today, we're talking about tens of millions of dollars of investment that will be the customer's investment. It will be their money that we will be proposing to invest in whatever future scenarios on these sorts of things. So we need to start that education process now, as these are very complicated subjects. So I would encourage us, as we're pulling together these sorts of reports, to always put it through the filter of, will this be, what can we do to help it make it as understandable to the public in these presentations, just as much as it is between GWP and the commissioners.
No, understood, and we'll try to focus a little bit on the balance between detail and making it understandable to the public. And we will have that for the final presentation. This was kind of a status update, but we'll make sure that the conclusions are simple and clear in the final presentation, and that the evidence supporting it's a little more clear as well. So I appreciate your comments.
Thank you. I do thank you, and I don't want to discourage your work. You're doing great stuff, but let's just be aware of our audience.
Appreciate
and
it.
As an attorney, I know you understand that.
Thank you.
Comments? Thank you. Next item, please.
Item 3E, financial update, Bill Fox.
Good evening, Commissioners. And I'd like to share with you two items tonight. First is we're going to do a financial update, and the second is we're going to take a look at the water rates RFP status, something that was brought up earlier by Commissioner Armenian. I'm very challenged here. Okay, as I indicated before, they have two parts. The financial update will be first and followed by the water rates RFP. This is an overview of where we were at the end of fiscal year 2010. On the electric utility, we ended up with a net income of $3.4 million. Under the water utility, we ended up almost break even. We were at a $100,000 loss. Ultimately, the combined GWP operation made $3.3 billion in 2010. Our overall profit margin is 1.5%.
I have one question about that, if I may interrupt. I know we had asked Council to keep the rate transfers constant. Was there any foreknowledge of what was occurring here so that the water transfer might have been applied more to power, or would that have been beneficial, or was there not enough time?
Well, the transfer is set.
Yeah.
So
What I mean, though, is that the $4.2 million that was transferred from water, if we had taken some of that maybe and put it in power, you wouldn't have had a negative margin on water. Maybe that would have been helpful to...
that's true, but of course that would be up to the City Council, and they have traditionally not done that.
And that's up to them. That's
Correct.
their prerogative.
That is
But I think it might be helpful if we point that out to them. I just have that comment. Thank you.
We're going to first spend a little time talking about the electric side of the business, then we're going to delve into the water side of the business. Then after that, we'll go into the discussion of the water rate RFP. From the electric financial trend, for the budget year 2010, comparing that to our actual 2010, the electric utility actually did a little bit better than we had anticipated. We had budgeted a $1.4 million net income. We ended up at a $3.4 million net income. So bottom line, we ended up with a higher level of net income. What's somewhat noticeable is the fact that our revenues are down. We had projected $247 million in revenues, and our actual came out at $188.4 million. And that actually consisted of two components. The first component is that our retail sales were actually less by about $37 million. Second is our wholesale revenues. Our wholesale activity in the wholesale market was down 24.5 over what we had budgeted. So even though that we had less activity, because of our spending patterns, we were still able to come out with a positive net income.
A question, if I may, on the reduction in the wholesale, was that due to the recession, or do we know what it's due to, or was it halo effect of the water conservation effort?
I think on the wholesale side, the reduction was a result of the fact that there wasn't as many opportunities in the marketplace.
I'm sorry, I meant retail.
There wasn't as many opportunities in the marketplace on the wholesale side. On the retail side, we do believe that it's primarily the result of the fact that the economy has slowed, and also the fact that there is conservation that's taking place by our customers. Those are the two factors that we can attribute that to. We actually have more total electric customers than we did last year, but we actually had less sales.
To get that clear, so the wholesale side, we have a decrease of $20 million, you mentioned?
About $25 million.
$25 million, so the rest was on the...
was on the retail side of the
retail
business.
side.
Going forward to the budget for 2011 and our forecast for 2011, keep in mind our forecast is so early in the year. It's based upon having actual data through October 31st. We've actually forecasted that our net income is going to be around $4.2 million as opposed to the $9.7 million that we had budgeted. And it's, again, volume driven. We're anticipating it'll have less activity than we had originally budgeted for. Our wholesale side of the business, again, has not been as robust as we thought it would be. And then in addition, we've had an adjustment in our fuel adjustment clause. Our revenue is slightly down there. If you recall, last January what we did is we reduced our fuel adjustment clause, and it caused about a 9% rate reduction for us. We're seeing that did have an impact, and we will be evaluating our fuel adjustment in January to see if, in fact, it should be at the current level or if it should possibly be increased. As you can see, the most recent data we have is as of October 31st. We've realized a net income through the period of October 31st of $2.3 million, or we have an operating margin of 3.1%. Regarding the city transfer, I want to say that that's something that's mandated by the City Council, and that's done every month through a journal entry, and so that's why you can see 6.4. It's predictable. By the end of the year, it'll be the full 19.1 million.
In that case, I take it forewarning council of in the manner that I mentioned before isn't really possible for you. I take it.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
We wanted to share with you the operating revenues, or the total revenues for year 2010. It was discussed earlier on the prior slide, but just to give you a breakout of our composition of our sales, as you can see, 88% of our sales are related to our retail operation. The wholesale side of the business, in this case, was only 6% of our operation, resulting in $10.4 million. So again, it was something that we didn't have as many sales, but we also didn't have the corresponding expense that goes along with it. And then the other items are very small in nature. Capital contributions, as we discussed before, is when somebody does building in the community and they deed the facilities over to us, then it becomes a capital contribution in benefit of GWP and the city. On the 2010 expenses, electric expenses, it was $185 million. The retail side of the business, as you can see, is large in part into the production. Our production, in fact, is 61% of our operation. This production was substantially less than we had anticipated. We had thought it was going to be $53 million larger than it was. And it, again, was $20 million on the wholesale side and $33 million on the retail side. So our expenses, we thought from a budget perspective, would be much higher than they are. But as you can see, a large part of our operation is through the production and our transmission and distribution. It's actually 73% of our total budget. We wanted to share with you the sources of our electricity production, and this is something I think you touched on earlier. The Glendale-owned facilities, which is the Grayson Power Plant, represented from our overall production standpoint 14% of the actual power produced. The power was produced from the other sources as our jointly owned facilities, primarily through SCAPA, and then we also have purchase power that we do on the market. Again, GWP looks very closely at trying to provide the least cost alternative, and that's why you see that Glendale facilities are used such a small percentage of the time. We thought it'd be interesting to show that somewhat like on the water side, we're seeing the same kind of decrease, or I shouldn't say same kind, but we're seeing a decrease in the amount of kilowatt hours that are being produced, or megawatt hours are being produced. Between fiscal years 07-08 and 08-09, there's a 7.4% reduction, and then this last year another 4.2% reduction. So if you look at it from a cumulative standpoint, it's 11.6% decrease in the production of electricity that's being sold in our system. Quite interestingly, as our classification of our electric meters, we actually have gone up in customers in all of our categories, except for streetlights where it's remained constant. I stand corrected. Industrial, we actually went down by 3. But in total, the number of customers have gone up slightly each year, and it should be noted that 85% of our customers are residential, and that we do have a very consistent customer base. But again, the customers are up, but sales are down. I'd like to go into the water utility and give you an overview of the financial trend. Our 2010 budget to actual comparison in our water indicated that we fared better than we had anticipated. Our budget for 2010 had actually indicated we'd have a $3.2 million loss, when in reality, when everything was complete, we were at a $100,000 loss, so that it was only a very small downturn. We almost were at a break even. What is interesting is that we had budgeted a loss in the 2010 year, and that was something that had been done because there had been anticipation of a grant coming from the state. There was a Chromium-6 grant, and that had originally been in the budget and had been taken out, and then in essence we never did get that money. However, Mr. Kavunas has recently told us that the state has made a promise to us and that we anticipate getting a large portion of the grant money within the next month to 2 months. So that's something that we'll be bringing forward to you once we receive that money. We anticipate that to be in the range of about $1.8 million. So that's something that will be well deserved for all the work that we've done, and it definitely comes at a time when we need the money. In taking a look at our 2011 budget, and this is something that you've gone over recently with us, we budgeted a break even at $40.3 million, both on the revenue and expense side, and we believe that we're going to come in slightly better than that, and it's because we definitely have, at least for the first few months, that we've found that we're actually controlling our operating expenses, and we anticipate, based on what we see at this point, that we're going to have a small net income of about $2.2 million. As of the end of October, we've realized a $1.6 million gain at this point. So at this point for 2011, thanks to the rate increase, we'll be able to meet the requirements not only on the operating side but on the capital side.
But this, if I can ask, this does not factor in, or kind of what you don't see in this is all the capital projects that have been deferred, correct?
That's correct, and we're going to go into that further into the presentation. We'll talk about some of the capital projects.
I'm pointing that out because I don't want people to think, well, you gave us a rate increase and you didn't really need it. The reality is that we've deferred a lot of important capital projects, and that's why I'm trying to balance these numbers at this small of a margin.
In fact, that's a very good point that you bring up. The fact that we do have a little bit of room at this point will be utilized under the capital projects, which we've deferred many of them, and we'll share some of that with you. Taking a look at our 2010 operating results on the water revenues, see that the large majority, 90% of our sales relate to our potable water sales. Of that, about 80% of that number is for our residential customers, and the other 20% is for our commercial and industrial customers. The recycled water sales this past year was 4%. That's an area that we definitely would like to increase. And then the others are very minor amounts. The biggest portion, again, is our potable water sales. On the expense side, we had $38 million. The largest portion of our expense side relates to our production as well as our transmission and distribution. In the production area, which represents 58% of our total costs, About 60% of that relates to the Metropolitan Water District water purchases that we make. The remainder of that relates to our local production, basically our ground wall water that we produce, as well as our recycled water that we produce. And so that covers about 58% of our cost. The transmission and distribution of that water is the other large part of our cost, 12% of our cost. As far as our water meters, number of our water customers, you can see that the number, again, we're a fairly stable customer base. We've slightly increased each of the last 3 years, but again, it shows that we're relatively a grown-out system, and you're going to see small fluctuations, but no major increases are anticipated. Under the volume of water sold, we wanted to share with you the fact that we are seeing a slight decrease in the units of water sold in each of the last 3 years. In looking at the retail sales of the water, again, about 80% of that water is our residential customers, approximately 20% is our commercial and industrial, and then the other small amount is our recycled water that we sell. We wanted to give you a 3-year look at the water sales and try to place some perspectives on it. Since, if we take a look at our 2007-8 to 8-9, our decrease in number of water sales actually decreased only 4%. But if you again look at the period of when mandatory conservation took place between 08 and 09 and 09-10, you can see that the volume of water sold actually decreased 13.5%. So that it definitely shows that the water conservation effort that was put into place is working. We wanted to share with you the water supply, and basically that's where do we get our water from. Again, as I indicated earlier, it's about 59% of our water comes from Metropolitan Water District. The 35% comes from our local groundwater sources, and 6% of our water comes from our recycled water facilities that we've put into place.
Does this represent a 1-year average or like a 10-year average?
No, this represents just the last fiscal year.
Right, okay.
We have done slides in the past where we've looked at the dispersion over time, and if that's something you'd like to see in the future, we could do that.
No, I just wanted to have it pointed out for viewers.
The discussion on the capital projects is something that I think is relevant. This slide here is a snapshot of all the GWP projects, taking a look at our 2010 budget to actual, our budget to forecast for 2011, and what we've spent year to date through October 31st. And what we'd like to do is go through each of the categories: electric service, power management, water services, and the utility operations center, which is a shared facility, so that you can kind of see what kind of activity has taken place. Under the electric services, for the year ending 2010, our budget was $36.6 million, and we actually spent $32.4 million. So we spent slightly under, and the interesting part is we tried to control the cost, as Commissioner Armenian said. We're aware that we were on a very tight budget, and so as such, certain things got deferred. However, in the AMI area, we actually spent more than that. Again, that's a timing issue. Ultimately, we haven't anticipated any overruns in our project, but in the electrical services section, which is the section that Mr. Aboig's responsible for, we're actually ahead of schedule, and as a result, we've actually spent a little bit more than we had anticipated.
I find that ironic because in the earlier presentation by Mr. Quinnan, you had the AMI expenses consistently under the budgeted amount.
Yes.
So what happened here?
Well, I don't specifically know what happened other than the fact that during the course of 2010, we had a number of different efforts going on, and this particular advanced meter infrastructure is a culmination of several smaller projects. It's not just one project together. And what we've done is group them in a manner here so that you could see the total cost. But in essence, we've accelerated in some areas of the project. In other areas, we are behind. This particular area under Mr. Boyd, we're actually slightly ahead of schedule.
So the answer is we're measuring different things.
Well, I wouldn't say different things. In the way that we have an overall project, what I've done is I've broken it down by functional area here. So for the electrical services section, you have a piece. You have a piece for the power management. You also have a piece for water, and then our common facilities. So depending upon which part of the operation you're looking at, some might be above budget, some might be behind budget.
And the way it's accounted for is a little bit different also, and that always gets in the way. But since we're behind schedule in the installation of the meters, the accounting for those doesn't show up yet because they are not part of our physical system. However, they have been purchased. The meters are purchased, and that's the differential you see.
Thank you.
Next section is the power management capital group. That's the area that's primarily the power plant. And we had budgeted $8.2 million for 2010. We actually spent $2.5. And in this area, part of this goes into the fact that if you take a look at the steam unit capital improvements and gas unit capital improvements, some of those costs did not get incurred, and that's part of the planning and review process that's taken place. As Mr. Lenz has gone through and done some modeling, and before we go off and we spend money, we want to make sure that the money's being spent in an appropriate manner. So in these particular areas, we haven't spent the money at this point, and it was a result of the fact that we're doing our modeling and trying to make determination of how we should be spending the money.
So this is not deferred capital related to...
Well, in a sense, you might call it deferred capital, but it's deferred in the sense that we're going through and making some management decisions. As you saw Mr. Lenz go through and provide you with some detailed modeling. Before you go off and spend money in a certain area, you want to make sure that we're going to be using certain facilities before we go off and we spend the money. So that's what's taking place here.
You anticipate spending more in 2011, though, I see.
We
your
do
budget's higher.
anticipate spending some. Again, what's a little bit difficult is I've tried to group categories into common themes because, as you well know, there's multiple projects that GWP is accountable for. So I've taken steam unit capital improvements, and that could be several different projects, and I've grouped it into something that would be known and recognizable as opposed to calling it something of a technical nature that people wouldn't understand what it is.
Understood.
Bottom line, in 2010, less money was spent in the power management capital area. Right now, according to our budget and forecast, they believe that they'll spend all the money, but as of current year-to-date, October 31st, only $400,000 has been spent. Under the water services capital, for the fiscal year 2010, the budget was $26.6 million, and actually $24.1 million was spent. So it was fairly close on a budget to actual basis. Going through in our going forward budget to actual forecast for 2011, Mr. Kavunas at this point believes that he's going to be on budget by the end of the year. So far, year-to-date, through October, they've spent $5 million of the $24 million that's been set aside for capital projects.
Can you explain that a little bit further? We've spent $5 million of the budgeted $24 million?
Yeah. What happens is each month on the financial statements, excuse me, all the expenses, revenues, as well as capital costs are recorded. And in capital budgeting and capital accounting, not everything will come through on a month-by-month basis. So if you take a look at employee salaries, we know every month you have employees on the payroll and you're going to have costs. And in essence, by the end of the year, you will have the full 12 months' worth. Each month, you'll probably incur 1 month's worth of salaries. In a capital project, it won't necessarily happen that way. In essence, you may not start a capital project until midway through a year. So you chug along and it looks like you haven't spent any money, then all of a sudden you spend a lot of money because you started a project at that point in time during the year. So some projects will last over a course of a few months and some might last several years. In our particular case, through the period ending October 31st, we've only spent $5 million. By the end of the year, we anticipate still to be within our forecast of $24.1 million.
By end of the year, you mean?
The end of this next fiscal year.
Okay.
Yeah. Hope not by the end of December.
I just wanted to clarify that because it might think here that we're meeting in the next 2 weeks, you're going to spend $20 million.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
The last area is our Utilities Operations Center, and that's, in essence, the Grayson Power Plant site. And that includes also that we have water operations there at the plant site itself. There are a number of projects that have been identified, and in 2010, we did defer a major portion of the work that had been planned. If you take a look at the walls and entrance gates, we had budgeted $9.1 million, and then the parking lot we had budgeted $5.4, and we actually spent only $2.2 million of that money. We only did what was the bare amount that was required at that point. We didn't build it out as we had intended to design, and that was basically the fact that there wasn't sufficient funds at that point. So again, Commissioner Armenian, your observation earlier of we had to defer capital, we did in this case defer a capital project. Going forward for 2011, we have budgeted 5.7, and currently we anticipate spending the full 5.7. On a year-to-date basis, we've only spent 1.4 at this point. So at this point, what I'd like to do is go into the second part, which is the water rates RFP update. What we did is we ended up putting out a request for proposal to help us design new water rates for the utility. Our anticipated deadline was to get something in place starting our next fiscal year. We sent our RFP out to 15 qualified independent consulting firms. Those firms were selected based upon recommendations from the finance officers. A survey was done by all the finance officers at the various cities, and they had provided us with a list of qualified firms that had good reputations where there were positive outcomes in their studies. So we picked 15 firms, and we picked firms that were California-based firms that would have an understanding of the dynamics of our state. We also placed the RFP on our website so that if there were additional firms that were interested, they would have an opportunity to bid. We did not want to exclude anybody from the opportunity to bid. We did receive 9 responses out of the 15 that were sent. In order to help identify and bring the list of 9 proposals down to something a little bit more manageable, we did a proposal analysis, and that analysis was taking a look at 5 scoring criteria or categories that have been developed, and those were put into the RFP so that the respondents would be aware of it. And you can see the 5 qualifications that we identified. Each one of them were given a weighting of 20%. Under each of these categories, we developed a several different subcategories. So under qualifications and experience, for example, we would want to know how many studies that they've done in the past, the people that would be assigned to the engagement, years of experience in the industry, so that we would have an idea that we're getting people that have done this before. So under each of these categories, there were sub-elements, and that we would be able to then develop a weighted ranking. At the end of the day, we were able to identify through our ranking setup a listing of all our different respondents from 1 to 9. And what we did is then forced rank those based upon two methods. The first method should have been uncurved. Basically, we're taking raw numbers, adding up all the points based upon their responsiveness to our RFP. The goal was to make sure that people read the RFP, understood the criteria that we asked for, and that they showed an understanding of what we desired. So we took all the points, added them all up, and then we came up and force ranked the people from 1 to 9. Then the second thing is we took the highest rank and then we did a curving. Much like when you were in college, you had the professor curve the scores. Well, it really didn't make much difference when we curved versus uncurved. Only two changed, number 5 and number 6. What we thought we would do, because of the dispersion of the results, we took top 6 firms. Initially, we were going to leave it at the top 3, but there was such a close ranking between all the firms, it was necessary to include the top 6. So only the 3 bottom ones got excluded from the process.
By the way, just to clarify, your acronym CUWCC, that I take it stands for California Utility Water Conservation Commission?
That's correct.
Okay.
We have a water rate design schedule. This is something that we did provide before for you, and there has been a small change on it. Ultimately, the end timeline has not changed, but the proposal review completion date was changed. This was a result. It took longer to go through the proposals than we had originally had anticipated. When you're going through 9 proposals and doing a diligent job and trying to identify all the components, it does take longer than we had anticipated. We do have interviews scheduled for December 9th, and on our interview panel we have 2 commissioners. Commissioner Yao and Commissioner Miller have volunteered their time. Bob Elliott, our finance director, will be on the panel. We will have Patrick Hayes, who's the chief water engineer, will also be on the panel, and then I will be on the panel. So there'll be 5 people on the panel. Our schedule is that we have set aside 1 hour for each of our proposers to come in. They will be providing us with a short presentation talking about their skills, characteristics, and they'll be sharing their models with us, and then followed by a series of questions. All the questions will be same to all the firms, and then in the end, we will make a deliberation, and then a determination will be made. My anticipation is at the completion of the interviews on that day, we will have an answer, and then we will make a recommendation to go forward and to City Council and make a project award. January 5th is the date that we anticipate that we'll go forward to City Council with our recommendation. If the firm is over $50,000 in our response, then we will need to go to City Council for approval. If it's under $50,000, then it won't require approval. But my anticipation is that in any respect, we need to brief council so that they're aware of the progress, because this is an important issue to them and the community. The remainder items on our schedule have not changed. We're trying to stick within our original schedule. In fact, one of our criteria is the ability for these respondents to meet our rigorous guidelines that we put in, because frankly, a July 1st implementation is somewhat on the aggressive side, but we do want to be able to meet that requirement. So So with that, if there's any additional questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I don't know if this is an appropriate time to do this or whether it's better under old business, but do we have any indication from the city attorney's office about the water transfer issue?
Commissioner Armenian, the report has not yet been finalized or released, so I don't have any information to share today, but I would expect that either at the January or the February commission meeting.
So it takes about 8 months to figure this sort of issue out? Because we've been talking about this since August, and we keep hearing next month and next month. So I think it's an important issue because it was kind of the source of the contention on the water rate increase. And so I think it's really important that we explain that to the public, whatever the position of the city is. And it just seems like it's taking an extraordinary time to come up with a determination.
Understood. And the city attorney has committed to bringing the issue to the city council, so per their direction. So once that report goes to the city council, fortunately in December there are fewer meetings. In bringing it to the commission, but as I said, January meeting it would be somewhat dependent on the timing.
On one of the January city council meetings. It would be on one of the January city council meetings.
That's what I expect.
Projection.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
As a follow-up, do you have an inclination on where it's going? I mean, one way or the other? For the official, I mean, this is like a non-binding.
Well, as I indicated, you know, the city attorney has committed to bring the report to the city council. I think we need to wait until that occurs.
So, I mean, I do see that at the agenda forecast for January, so potentially that could be pushed back to February, but we'll discuss.
Okay. I do have a question. In looking at the analysis and more specifically the weighted rankings that you provided for the candidates applying for the proposal, I noticed that you guys basically assigned 20% to each of these categories. Just in the future, one would argue that not every single one of these categories don't necessarily equal 20%. Some may be more important than others. And
I totally agree, and I went by the direction that I felt was best under the circumstances, but I do recognize that in some cases certain rankings would be worth more or less. What I didn't want to do is I didn't want it to be so cost-driven that we would end up not getting the best provider. And whether this was the right mix or not, I totally understand. What my fear was, if I take the lowest bidder, we may get an inferior product, and we'll all end up being called on the carpet and have a negative outcome. So I do appreciate that.
yeah, and not necessarily from a pricing perspective, but other things such as experience and qualifications and their previous jobs may factor in more than the timeline of the job itself. And I know it's hard because it's very arbitrary and how do you assign these percentages, but just focus on that.
Good point. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Let's see, I had a question on your electric financial trend. Your total net income was $2 million more than the budgeted amount, which is a threefold increase in terms of relative value, 0.6% to 1.8%. What's the fate of that excess money? Is it kept in reserves in case we overspend next year, or is it reinvested in the capital program?
The money at the end of the fiscal year would end up going into the GWP reserve.
Okay. And can we comment on the fiscal effect and feasibility of transferring maybe a portion of the water transfer over to the power system, let's say a couple of $100,000 maybe to provide some relief to water, or no, I realize that I'm just asking, is there like fiscal effect generally?
Honestly, we have not looked at that.
Yeah.
But I mean, you make the assumption that if we transfer more, make reallocations between the two utilities, which is possible, that would have an impact, positive or negative, on the utility making that transfer. So we have not done that. We've not looked at it. Possibility.
Maybe it's worth looking at. I realize that there is a lot of consequences of doing that, but maybe it would help out, provide some short-term relief for your fiscal trouble in the water side.
Yeah. Good point.
I have other questions.
Well, thank you.
Hold on.
Okay.
I'm sorry, a couple of other questions. On your slide on the source of electricity production, which is a pie chart, are your renewables mostly in purchase power, or do you know?
I
Just kinda
can
curious about that.
respond.
Yeah. Mhm.
Most of our renewables are power purchase contracts. Have ownership in portion.
Okay. And jointly governed also small?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Let's see. Classification and number of electric meters. Your numbers are, as you mentioned, are relatively constant. This also applies to your water meters, I think, or maybe it's more to the water meters. I know there's some legislation under discussion that might increase the number of sub-meters. If that were to take place, would you want to separately classify that from your non-sub-meters, just to indicate the difference between growth versus regulatory effects? You don't even have to answer that. I'm just making a suggestion in case that legislation goes into effect. That's all. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Fox. We'll see you on Thursday.
Yeah.
Item, please.
Item 3F, Electric Reliability Report. Jane Lee, Senior Electrical Engineer, will present on behalf of Ramona Blake.
Mr. President and Commissioners, for November, we have 9 major outages, and 4 of them happened on November the 11th on the windstorm, which gusted up to 46 miles per hour. We did not find any direct causes for the 4 outages during November 11, but we suspect it's the palm frond or tree branches that caused the primary overhead contact. And out of the 4 outages during the November 11, 6,000 customers were affected by 4 occasions, and totaling minutes from 7 to 21 minutes. And 13 customers had lost power at 157. The other 5 outages during November. One happened on November the 2nd. It's the tropical number 4 that we found a short in the underground cable and the area that are 709 customers for 9 minutes. On November the 6th, and the western feeder number 2, and relayed because the failure of underground cable, and at the intersection during Flower Street and the Western Avenue, that in a boat that caused 1,548 customers for 111 minutes, and 112 customers for 223 minutes. On November 20th, Tropical 4 relayed because the palm frond was landed over the overhead lines at 536 East Cypress Street, affected 709 customers at 36 minutes. On November 25th, and Montrose number 7 feeder relayed because of a squirrel went into an overhead conductor at New York and Mills Avenue, affected 1,005 customers for 7 minutes. On November 26th, Acacia Feeder 4 relayed because of a mylar balloon coming into contact at overhead conductors at the intersection of San Fernando Road and El Bonito. 207 customers were affected for 8 minutes. For the past 12 months, major indices, But for the site fee, we have 0.96, which means that we have less than one customer being one outage per customer being affected. And for the site fee, it's 95.1, and that means we have 35 minutes per customer, and this is below our 40 minutes of go per customer. The KD for the 12 months is 0.61. That tells us that where each customer experienced outage, they were on an average of 36 minutes per interruption. That's below our 40 minutes goal. For the last 5 years, our outage trend has been steadily going down. Only 1 month left for 2010. We shall meet our goal of less than one outage per customer, less than 40 minutes per each outage, and less than 40 minutes for each customer.
I just want to commend the power system for once again meeting the goals and outages. I know that publishing the outages indicates what really amounts to a kind of failure of sorts, but the fact that we're able to meet the goal means that we've made the right investment to, to save the public the money from loss of outages. So anyway, congratulations on that. You've done very well for some time.
I do have a question. Thank you very much for your report. November 6th, there's a failure of underground cable. That's number 2 in the second set of the outages. So this is the failure of underground cable in a vault. And lasted for 111 minutes for 1,548 customers and 223 minutes for over 100 customers. I know that there is a plan for infrastructure upgrade and cable replacement and things like that. Was this planned for replacement, or do we know the cause of that?
That area
Failure?
is very congested, and the cables are very old, and the restore of power takes time to reroute, and that area under last construction. Yes, we are having plans in the area to go through extra gateways, substation upgrade, and feeder redistricting.
So we are in the process of replacing
Yes.
these cables, and hopefully we will decrease these types of outages.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Oh, you have a comment?
I just wanted to make a general comment, and that is that, this is for the benefit of the public, that, when there are outages, I know everyone wants their power on as quickly as possible, but it's really important that that be done with the safety of the public and the safety of the employees in mind. So to rush work for the sake of meeting numeric goals on restoration of power can't be done at the expense of compromising safety for employees as well as the public. So the understanding of those affected, those customers affected, when their power is out, is most appreciated, I'm sure, by Glendale Water and Power as well as the employees working on this sort of matter.
For your comment.
I also want to note the last 2 pages here in your report that shows the website visits for Glorieta Electrical Substation. I guess it's here attached for our information that there are over 9,918 visits. A lot of the customers go there to check on the outage status, right?
Yes.
Is that what the customers use it for? No?
It's being rebuilt right now. The
I'm sorry?
Glorieta substation is being rebuilt,
It's being rebuilt.
and we have cameras actually focused on it.
Oh, I see. Okay. So the public is just clicking in, interested in looking at what's going on.
Yeah, the reason we presented this data was Commissioner Armenian asked that question when we did give you an update on the Glorieta substation project and shared with you the website. He wanted to know if people are accessing them and for what reason.
Okay, great.
And whether that approach was effective in community outreach to see how much interest there is. So clearly there is interest.
There is, yeah. Okay, great.
which is by the way a segue. If you haven't reserved yet, we are going to have the Glorieta tour on December 16th at 9:30. This is a great opportunity. If you're not familiar with electric substations, at least we can show you. You can touch and feel before they get energized. I encourage you to attend if you can.
What's the date on that again?
December 16th at 9:30, and I believe there were emails sent inviting you. And we will meet here in front here by the small parking lot at about 9:10. We will have some vans so we don't all have to drive.
Do we know how long that tour will last?
Allow for an hour to an hour and a half. It really depends on how many groups we have to form and how many participants we have. But I think it'll be a great tour. You'll enjoy it. So you can see the difference between how it used to be constructed, how it is constructed now, and the improvements we're making in the system. I think this is a great opportunity.
Additional comments? Thank you, Mr. Berg. All right, next item, please.
Item number 4, oral communications.
I have no cards here with me, so let's consider that closed. Next item, please.
Item number 5, old business.
Any old business?
On the last meeting minutes, we had a mention of the report on the constitutionality of the water revenue transfer, and I just wanted to make sure, I guess we'll put that on the agenda forecast, maybe for January.
I think it's presently showing on the January agenda forecast, and as I indicated previously, it's somewhat dependent on which agenda the city council, because that needs to precede.
Understood, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't see it on the agenda forecast.
Oh,
but
is it not on there?
Okay, I see it there. It's just that it wasn't on water rate transfer. Okay, yes, there is something there. And then the low-income programs that Commissioner Yao had raised in the November 1st
But
meeting.
that was from the last meeting where we mentioned that the city council was going to vote on the water rate increase, and one of the stipulations was that they wanted some information on low-income programs. And so at that point, we thought that whatever was going to be presented at the city council for the water rate increase was going to be presented in this meeting. So that was my suggestion. So I wasn't sure if the city council received any updates on what loan.
No, in fact, they specifically asked us to not present that. And in fact, just to give you an update, we are very, very limited on what we can do on the water side for low income or any kind of assistance since Proposition 218 limits water expenditures to anything directly related to sale of water. Anything that goes beyond that and use the parallel of the public benefits charge on the electric side, where we do actually have funding for low-income senior programs, we cannot duplicate that on the water side. So we informally noted that to a couple of city council members, and recognizing that, they have not present anything.
That wasn't on the agenda.
Okay, fine.
Old business?
None.
So no other business? Let's move
Actually,
on.
I wanted to get an understanding on the, we had discussed having someone from the city come and talk about the diversity and staffing issues as they pertain to GWP. Where do we stand on that?
Right. And I discussed earlier in the day with Commissioner Yao, and because this is an item that's outside the jurisdiction of the GWP Commission, we're not able to bring this to this commission. That would be something that would have to go on the Civil Service Commission agenda, if at all. This commission is very limited in that, well, like any commission, it's limited to the items that are within its role as a GWP commission or whatever commission it may be. So because that's outside of your scope of jurisdiction, that's not an item that we can bring to this commission.
I guess I'm failing to understand how staffing issues having to do with GWP are outside the scope of the GWP Commission.
Well, my understanding is that the request was for a report regarding diversity of staffing.
In GWP.
Right, and that's not within your jurisdiction.
But it's a GWP matter. So how are you allocating that to someone else, to another commission when it's a GWP-related matter?
Well, because the Civil Service Commission is tasked with employment-related matters, hiring, firing, anything related to staffing
So if we were to
issues.
talk about generational diversity, how are we coping with making sure that we've got the workforce of the future with GWP? Civil Service Commission would end up dealing with that and not GWP Commission?
Well, I mean, from a general operational standpoint, insofar as it may affect the operations of GWP, potentially within the scope, but I fail to see, the city attorney fails to see how diversity is within your jurisdiction.
Maybe if I can interject, maybe it's not a diversity issue, but more of a staffing issue where we want to make sure that GWP has enough adequately staffed or inadequately staffed. Is that in the purview of this commission?
Well, I mean, looking at what your powers and duties are under the Glendale Municipal Code, you are tasked with investigating the operations and facility of the Glendale Water and Power Department and the need for changes or additions in plant or in its operation, and to make recommendations to the arguably, the staffing levels might be something that is an operational recommendation, if you will, but only in that context. Beyond that, then
We have had a report before on that very topic, I believe, didn't we? In fact, it was earlier this year.
That was the impetus for this discussion
Okay.
now, is that we
Yeah.
have a 10-year report to show the variation in staffing over the 10-year period, and including diversity as well. So if we don't want to discuss the diversity issues, maybe we can talk about the staffing appropriateness for GWP.
Well, that sounds good. I did want to ask, do we have the right to have a motion to have the Civil Service Commission address the issue that Commissioner Armenian has raised?
well, your role is limited to advising the city manager. So I'm not certain that you can make a motion to advise another commission.
Motion to advise the city council to advise the Civil Service Commission.
If you'd like, I can discuss this further with the city attorney and advise you as to what manner you could possibly get this on the City Service Commission agenda, if that's your desire, to be mindful of what the role of this commission is.
Yeah, I think ideally we want to discuss that in front of this commission in terms of GWP matters. And staffing is one topic that I think is relevant, but that's our opinion.
Well, perhaps we could follow up on that if you could speak to the city attorney and provide us a legal opinion as to how we could approach this subject in a manner consistent with the law. Thank you.
And just maybe eliminate that diversity issue. I think we can deal with the staffing issue without diversity. Is that okay?
I guess diversity has many different definitions depending on how you're looking at it, but generational diversity is also a diversity issue. So, define it however you want as lawyers, but the fact of the matter is that GWP employees represent a substantial number of employees, and I think we should be looking at the business and the operations from the perspective of that employee angle as well. So to carve that out and all of a sudden say it's a Civil Service Commission issue, I think is misdirected, because it is, you have to, when you're looking at the operations of a sizable operation like this, you have to be able as a commission to also be able to look at it from its staffing perspective. So that's just my opinion.
Is the concern with generational diversity more an issue of concern with impending retirements and knowledge transfer?
We have every utility is dealing with a retirement
Baby boomer,
bubble.
yeah.
You're dealing with, and I know we've had some preliminary discussions about this, but you're talking about different workforce skill sets that are going to be needed for the utility of the future, as there's a heck of a lot of business transformation occurring. And so I think you can't not deal with those issues and the impact on the operations without also talking about the employee issues having to do with specifically looking at it from the perspective of the GWP. In other words, no one's saying we need to, in this commission, look at the overall city's employee issues, even though it may be managed that way by the city, but the reality is you have to, as looking at the operations, you have to look at it strictly through the GWP lens as well.
How about if we request a plan for succession planning? That's within GWP. We have talked about it several times.
Anything that impacts operational or resource issues, certainly is within purview.
That's right.
And we discuss that all the time. So, that's the best way to screen this issue, is if it has an impact on operational or our ability to do the work, then we can discuss it.
I think the use of a term like diversity implies some connection with the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act or something, and I think that may be what Council is reacting to. But the issue that you just brought up is very germane to the operational ability of this utility. So,
And that's correct. Part of my concern is that there are very definite legal restrictions when you're talking about diversity in the context of race or ethnicity, as far as what you can and cannot. Another concern, if you will, that I have is that the role of this commission is advisory and doesn't include directing the department to take action. So I guess that too would just need to be.
I think I can code that. I think our commissioners up here understand that perspective as well. But just that in the recent discussion and meetings that the public has brought up the issue of why is GWP spending so much money on resources, and labor is one of the items. So it helps us to understand the impact that has on GWP if we consider the staffing issue. So I think that's all we're asking, I think, is to understand from that perspective the staff involved and how much it takes to run an operation like GWP.
well, I'll second any request for
Workforce development, which is a huge issue for the industry.
I'll second a request for a succession planning issue, although maybe, we want to discuss that a little bit. I mean, what are our concerns with labor availability in coming years? Succession planning is obviously one issue, but do you even have a concern with a massive proportion of your workforce retiring in a short time frame?
I would caution the commission not to get into substantive detail at this meeting.
All right. Thank you.
So it sounds like it's something that we can continue to discuss as well as bring up in future agenda items if it's not Title 9 or Title 7, you said?
Title 7.
Title 7. So if it's generic enough where it impacts operations, then we could potentially discuss that and agendize it.
Correct.
And we'll expect a report from you on a kind of a legal opinion, so to speak, on our scope of responsibility or power with respect to discussing these issues.
We can put that on the agenda, certainly.
Thank you.
Old business? Oh, Mr. Steiger?
I would just like to note, I was not here at the last meeting. Just prior to the last meeting, we were recognized by Grid Week. I received the award for a national award for smart grid deployment, which goes a long way in describing how well our staff is project. More recently, the American Public Works Association has recognized our Chevy Chase Reservoir reconstruction project as the project of the year. So, very proud of that, and I just wanted to that note to you.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Steiger.
Great,
Congratulations.
thanks. Wonderful.
Yeah, that's excellent news. Thanks. I hope whenever we get awards in the future or acknowledgement that we can share it at the commission meetings. Yeah, thank you.
So let's move on to the next item, please.
Item number 6, new business.
Yes, I did have one question. Every year, I think we have an annual report that goes out to creditors and the public and so forth. Have we, when is the next one coming out?
The annual report will end up coming out after the city issues its CAFR. First, the city has to go through its reporting process, and then GWP is addressed by the outside auditors after that.
Okay.
Much of the data that comes through our GWP annual report is also provided in the CAFR, so that information is audited, so we'll try to get it out as soon as possible.
Maybe February or so, you think? Or?
Well, I work in coordination with Mr. Basson, so between the two of us, we'll have to make sure that we address it in a timely manner for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next item, please.
Item number 7, agenda forecast.
Agenda forecast, looks like we have a lot of items to cover for January. Are those all appropriate? Anything needs to be changed, Mr. Steiger? Yes?
I'd like to add one, with your permission. We've been discussing the application of Facebook as part of our outreach. What we'd like to do is make a short presentation to you at the next meeting on the benefits to doing that for GWP.
Will be a social media update.
Social media, yeah.
Applying social media. For that?
No, I don't think so. Anything else that you guys want to update?
Presumably, the legal opinion we requested could be presented in January. I would ask that be put on.
Is that the update?
No, this is on the staffing,
Oh,
or
right.
maybe labor issues generally, I guess, is a better way of putting it. I did want to thank the utility for having a year-long agenda forecast and outlining all the periodic reports that we have.
Very useful. And also, there's one item, I think, we have elections in January. Should that be?
That's right. Congratulations on that. Let's see, strategic plan quarterly update. I think we have August, September, October, November, December occurring. That's 5 months, and presumably one of those months should have a. Okay. The review of capital improvement in April and the fiscal state of the utility, presumably that's timed so that any rate increase issue we would be able to. Okay.
And also, so it aligns with our budget.
Superb.
You know, I was thinking about the next meeting, January 3rd. Is that going to be an issue? Because a lot of people will be out for that weekend. Should we consider changing that to the following week?
Talking about January 3rd?
Yeah, to January 10th.
I would actually agree with that. I was going to mention that. You brought it up. Right after the holidays. Traveling, that may be.
Right. At home watching.
Speaking personally, I have no problem with January 3rd, but I also have no problem changing the date if it's more convenient for others. Yeah.
Yeah,
On my
that's-
end. I have no problem with the 3rd, but
The only thing
objection.
is we'll probably be run up against the other commission meeting on the 10th, the women commission.
Oh, right, because we're changing it.
Yeah, so we might be limited due time if we have all these items to discuss. So, but we can make it happen.
How about the other commissioners? Commissioner Chow?
I have no problem with the 3rd, but I'm open to the 10th as well.
As I mentioned that fact, I'm out on the 10th, actually. I'm actually out for the 9th, 10th, and 11th of January.
You're staying on the 3rd, is what you're
So
saying.
if you guys I will be out of town. for
Okay,
9th,
so the 3rd would work for you better?
It would work better.
And what
Okay,
about
all right.
staff? Mrs. Steiger,
Not a
is your
problem.
staff? Okay, your staff will be available on the 3rd?
Yes.
All right, then.
Since we're looking at a year-long here, are there any items, and perhaps they're included here, that I'm not aware of, but Mr. Lenz gave a kind of a forecast of a process he's going through in terms of looking at our power generation and the mix and future options. Is there any point in the year that might make sense to put in any updates on that process? Or is it too early to tell?
Placeholder.
I think we should put it in. I think we should put something in if there's an expectation.
That, we'll put a placeholder there for
Yeah.
now. Yeah. That's it.
April may not be the best month for it, but
And what month would be appropriate for the budget review?
Hey.
May?
In April, you have the fiscal state of the utility. Would that be the same as a discussion of the budget or slightly different? I guess that's more like a balance sheet or something. Oh, okay.
Kind of an annual budget.
Okay.
The changes? Great. If not, we'll call for adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.